My name is Jessica Martinez, and I never imagined that my sister Ashley's fairy tale wedding at the exclusive Broadmoor Resort would become the stage for my mother's most vicious attack yet. Standing there in my bridesmaid dress, watching 300 guests witness my public humiliation, I felt my world crumbling around me. But what my mother didn't know was that the distinguished man in military dress uniform, sitting quietly in the back row, was about to turn her cruelest moment into the most life-changing revelation of my existence. When General James Morrison stood up and asked if there was a problem with his agent, everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, and my worth was about to be rewritten forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the affluent Cherry Hills Village neighborhood of Denver, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. My mother Patricia had built a successful real estate empire, my stepfather Robert climbed the corporate ladder at a major insurance firm, and we lived in a sprawling two-story home with manicured gardens that regularly appeared in neighborhood magazines. Every holiday card showed our smiling faces, every family gathering seemed harmonious, and every achievement was celebrated with expensive dinners and proud social media posts. But like many families that look flawless on Instagram, the reality behind closed doors told a completely different story. From my earliest memories, I understood that I was different from the rest of my family. While my sister Ashley glided through life collecting academic honors, homecoming crowns, and eventually a full scholarship to medical school, I was the one who preferred camping trips to country club events, who chose ROTC over cheerleading, and who announced at 17 that I planned to enlist in the Army after graduation. The disappointment in my mother's eyes that day remains burned into my memory, the way her perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass until her knuckles went white, and how she excused herself from dinner without another word. My younger brother Tyler, born when I was 6, seemed to inherit all the traits that endeared him to our parents. He was charming where I was serious, social where I was introspective, and naturally gifted at the kind of easy conversations that made adults light up with approval. When Tyler brought home mediocre report cards, they were met with encouraging smiles and promises of ice cream. When I brought home straight A's, the response was a distracted nod and a comment about how I should be helping Ashley with her science project instead of focusing so much on my own achievement. Robert, who had married my mother when I was 5 and legally adopted me shortly after, maintained a polite but distant relationship with me throughout my childhood. He attended my school events when required, signed permission slips without comment, and provided everything I needed materially, but there was always an invisible wall between us that I could never quite understand. With Ashley and Tyler, he was warm and engaged, coaching Tyler's Little League team and driving Ashley to countless ballet recitals and academic competitions. With me, conversations were functional and brief, as if I were a houseguest who had overstayed their welcome. The question started early but took years to fully form in my mind. Why did I look nothing like anyone else in the family, with my olive skin and dark hair standing out against their fair complexion? Why were there no baby pictures of me in our extensive family photo albums until I was walking and talking? Why did my mother change the subject whenever relatives mentioned how different I seemed from my siblings? And why did Robert's parents, who doted on Ashley and Tyler, always seem uncomfortable around me during family gatherings? The most telling moment came when I was 14 and we were visiting Robert's elderly aunt for Thanksgiving. After a few glasses of wine, she pulled my mother aside and said loudly enough for me to hear, "Patricia, dear, I still don't understand why you never told that poor child the truth about her father. She has a right to know." My mother's face went crimson and she quickly ushered the conversation to another room, but not before I caught the sharp look she shot in my direction, as if measuring how much I had heard and understood. High school brought new tensions as I gravitated toward activities that my family considered beneath our social status. While Ashley was being courted by Ivy League schools for her combination of academic excellence and social leadership, I was spending my afternoons at the shooting range with the ROTC program, and my weekends volunteering at the VA hospital. My mother would introduce Ashley to her real estate clients as my daughter who's going to be a doctor, while I was typically described as Jessica who's going through a phase. The military became my escape plan and my passion simultaneously. Something about the structure, the clear expectations, and the merit-based advancement appealed to me in ways that the social climbing and image management of my family never could. When I announced my intention to enlist rather than attend college, the family dinner that followed was one of the most uncomfortable nights of my teenage years. My mother spent an hour explaining all the reasons why military service was unsuitable for someone of my background and potential, while Robert sat silently, occasionally nodding in agreement, but never quite meeting my eye. Ashley, to her credit, tried to bridge the gap between my choices and our parents' expectations. She suggested I consider military medical corps, or perhaps attending West Point, anything that would combine my interests with the prestige our family valued. But I had already made up my mind, and at 18 I shipped out to basic training with nothing but a small duffel bag and a determination to prove myself in an environment where my value would be measured by my actions rather than my ability to fit into predetermined social categories. The military became the family I had never truly felt I had at home. In the structured hierarchy of Army life, respect was earned through competence and dedication rather than inherited through blood relationships or social connection. I thrived in this environment, quickly distinguishing myself in intelligence training and earning recommendations for advanced programs that would eventually lead to my current position as a special agent with top-secret clearance. During my first deployment, I discovered that I had a natural aptitude for intelligence work. My ability to observe details that others missed, combined with my skill at reading people and situations, made me valuable in ways that had nothing to do with my family name or social background. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely appreciated for who I was, rather than criticized for who I wasn't. The commendations and promotions that followed felt earned in ways that no family approval ever could. My relationship with my family during this period was cordial but distant. I called home regularly, sent updates about my training and deployments, and made sure to attend major holidays when my leave schedule permitted. But there was always an underlying tension, a sense that my career choice remained a source of embarrassment rather than pride. When I received my first major commendation for work I couldn't discuss due to classification levels, my mother's response was to ask when I planned to use my military experience to transition into a real career in the private sector. The contrast became even more apparent as Ashley progressed through medical school and began her residency at Denver General Hospital. Every achievement in her career was celebrated with family dinners and social media announcements, while my military accomplishments were met with polite acknowledgement and quick changes of subject. When Ashley was featured in a local magazine as one of Denver's rising young doctors, my mother framed the article and displayed it prominently in her real estate office. When I was selected for a highly competitive intelligence program that I couldn't even discuss in detail, the family dinner conversation quickly moved on to Tyler's latest college fraternity activities. The announcement of Ashley's engagement to Dr. Marcus Chen, a brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon from a prominent Denver medical family, was treated like a royal wedding announcement in our household. My mother immediately began planning what she described as the social event of the year, booking the Broadmoor Resort and hiring the most expensive wedding planner in Colorado Springs. Every detail was scrutinized and perfected, from the imported flowers to the custom-designed invitations that cost more than most people's monthly salary. My role in the wedding was reluctantly assigned rather than enthusiastically offered. When Ashley asked me to be a bridesmaid, my mother's initial response was to suggest that perhaps I would be more comfortable attending as a regular guest, given my unpredictable military schedule. It was only Ashley's insistence that secured my place in the wedding party, though I could sense the reluctance in every conversation about dress fittings and bridal events. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with increasingly uncomfortable family interaction. During dress fittings, my mother would make comments about how the bridesmaid dresses looked better on some people than others, usually while looking pointedly at me. At the bridal shower, she introduced me to her friends as Jessica, who's in the military, with the same tone she might use to describe an unfortunate medical condition. When relatives asked about my work, she would quickly redirect conversations toward Ashley's medical career or Tyler's college achievements. 3 weeks before the wedding, during what was supposed to be a relaxed family dinner, the underlying tensions finally erupted into open conflict. Tyler had just announced that he was changing his major for the third time, a decision that would extend his graduation by at least another year and cost thousands in additional tuition. Instead of the lecture I expected him to receive, my parents responded with understanding and support, offering to help him explore his options and find his true passion. When I mentioned that I had been selected for a promotion that would put me in line for assignment to the Pentagon, my mother's response was to ask if that meant I would finally be ready to leave the military and pursue a normal career. The implication that 8 years of dedicated service and multiple commendations represented a phase rather than a profession stung more than usual, and I found myself defending not just my career choice, but my entire adult identity. The argument that followed revealed depths of resentment and disappointment that had been building for years. My mother expressed her frustration with what she saw as my deliberate rejection of the opportunities and advantages I had been given. She complained that my military service reflected poorly on the family's social standing, that my absence during deployments had disrupted family gatherings, and that my inability to contribute to conversations about careers, relationship and lifestyle choices made me increasingly irrelevant to family dynamics. Robert, as usual, remained largely silent during this confrontation, offering only occasional nods of agreement when my mother paused for breath. Ashley tried to mediate, pointing out my accomplishments and suggesting that different people found fulfillment in different ways. Tyler, perhaps sensing an opportunity to deflect attention from his own academic struggles, made several comments about how military people were just playing dress-up and following orders instead of thinking for themselves. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom under posters I had taken down years ago, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. I was tired of seeking approval from people who seemed incapable of giving it, tired of defending choices that had brought me genuine satisfaction and success, and tired of feeling like an outsider in the family that was supposed to love me unconditionally. It was time to find out why I had never truly felt like I belonged, and I suspected the answers would explain far more than just family dynamics. The next morning, I began making calls to contacts I had developed through my intelligence work, people who knew how to navigate government records and databases in ways that weren't available to ordinary civilians. I explained that I needed help researching my own background, particularly anything related to my early childhood and adoption records. Within a few days, I had enough information to begin understanding why I had always felt like a stranger in my own family. The first breakthrough came from military personnel records. My contact found documentation showing that my biological father was Colonel Michael Torres, a highly decorated Special Forces officer who had been killed in Afghanistan when I was 3 years old. This explained not only my physical appearance, but also my natural affinity for military life and structure. According to his service record, Colonel Torres had been awarded multiple commendations for valor and had been posthumously promoted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After his death in an IED explosion, further investigation revealed that my mother had been married to Colonel Torres before her marriage to Robert, a fact that had been carefully omitted from every family history I had ever heard. Their marriage had been brief but apparently passionate, cut short by his deployment and subsequent death. The records showed that I was born Jessica Torres, and my name had been legally changed to Martinez when Robert adopted me. The most shocking discovery was that Colonel Torres had listed me as his beneficiary for various military benefits and insurance policies that had never been claimed. According to the records, there was a substantial sum of money that had been held in trust, waiting for me to reach adulthood and claim it. Either my mother had never been informed of these benefits, which seemed unlikely given the military's thorough notification procedures, or she had deliberately chosen not to pursue them. As I dug deeper into Colonel Torres's background, I discovered that he had family in Phoenix, who had never been contacted about my existence. His sister Lisa worked as a nurse at a veterans hospital, and his brother David was a retired Army sergeant who had served 3 tours in Iraq. Phone records and correspondence showed that they had tried to maintain contact with my mother after Michael's death, but their calls and letters had apparently gone unanswered. The picture that emerged was of a deliberate effort to erase Michael Torres from my life and rewrite my history to fit the narrative my mother preferred. Robert Martinez offered stability and financial security, while Michael Torres represented a painful reminder of loss and a connection to a world my mother had apparently wanted to leave behind. In choosing to embrace Robert's identity and lifestyle, she had effectively deleted my biological father's existence from family history. Armed with this information, I faced a difficult decision about what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront my mother immediately, to demand explanations for decades of lies and deliberate omissions. Another part wanted to reach out to the Torres family and begin building relationships that should have existed throughout my childhood. But the approaching wedding complicated everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready to handle the emotional fallout of revealing these discoveries. 2 days before Ashley's wedding, I made contact with Lisa Torres in Phoenix. Her reaction to my call was a mixture of joy and heartbreak that confirmed everything I had discovered. She and David had indeed tried to maintain contact with me, had sent birthday cards and Christmas presents that had apparently never reached me, and had spent years wondering about their brother's daughter who had seemingly disappeared from their lives. Lisa told me stories about my father that filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed in my understanding of myself. He had been passionate about justice and protection, driven to serve others, and gifted with an analytical mind that made him exceptional at intelligence work. The parallels to my own personality and career path were unmistakable, and for the first time in my life I understood why certain choices had felt so natural and right despite my family's disapproval. She also confirmed my suspicions about the military benefits and insurance policy. The Torres family had been contacted about these funds years ago, and had provided the military with updated contact information for my mother, assuming she would pursue the benefits on my behalf. When months passed without any claims being filed, they had tried to contact her directly, but their calls were never returned and their letters apparently never answered. The revelation that my mother had not only hidden my father's identity, but had also potentially cost me access to benefits and family relationships that were rightfully mine, added a new dimension to my anger and disappointment. This wasn't just about family dynamics or career choices anymore. It was about deliberate deception that had affected fundamental aspects of my identity and future opportunities. As I prepared to attend Ashley's wedding, I carried this new knowledge like a weight in my chest. I had planned to get through the ceremony and reception without causing any disruption, to celebrate my sister's happiness despite my own family conflicts, and to address these revelations privately after the wedding festivities were over. I had no idea that my mother had her own plans for public confrontation, or that the wedding would become the stage for the most dramatic and life-changing conversation of my life. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of Colorado mountain sunshine that made the Broadmoor Resort look like something from a fairy tale. As I stood in front of the mirror in my bridesmaid dress, adjusting the neckline for the third time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this day would be significant in ways none of us could anticipate. The weight of everything I had discovered over the past few weeks felt like a secret that was too big to contain, and I wondered if the truth had a way of revealing itself whether we were ready or not. The Broadmoor Resort buzzed with activity as wedding vendors transformed the grand ballroom into what my mother repeatedly called the event of the season. Crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across tables draped in ivory silk, while arrangements of white roses and baby's breath created a romantic atmosphere that would have been breathtaking if I hadn't been so focused on the undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow me everywhere. Ashley looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, her happiness genuine despite the family dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. As the morning progressed, I found myself observing my family through a completely different lens than I had just a week ago. Every interaction felt loaded with new meaning. Every casual comment carried weight that I hadn't previously understood. When my mother fussed over Ashley's hair and makeup, praising her natural beauty and radiant complexion, I wondered if she was thinking about the daughter who looked nothing like her. When Robert proudly adjusted his tie and practiced his father of the bride speech, I questioned whether he had ever truly seen me as his daughter or simply as an obligation he had inherited along with his marriage to my mother. The bridal suite was chaos in the most beautiful way possible. Ashley's maid of honor, her best friend from medical school, directed the other bridesmaids through final preparations while a professional photographer captured every moment. My mother held court in the center of the room, her real estate agent persona in full display as she managed details and ensured everything met her exacting standard. She wore a sophisticated navy blue dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly, and her confidence filled the room in a way that made everyone else seem to orbit around her energy. Tyler arrived mid-morning, looking handsome in his groomsman tuxedo but carrying the slightly disheveled appearance that had become his trademark since starting college. He hugged Ashley enthusiastically, complimented her dress with genuine affection, and immediately began charming the other bridesmaids with stories about his fraternity adventure. Watching him interact so naturally with everyone reminded me of how easily he had always fit into our family's social expectations, never questioning his place or feeling the need to prove his worth. When Ashley pulled me aside for a private moment, her expression carried the kind of sisterly concern that had always characterized our relationship despite our different paths in life. She held both my hands and looked directly into my eyes, her voice soft but serious as she spoke. "Jess, I know things have been tense with Mom lately, and I know today might be difficult for you, but I want you to know how much it means to me that you're here, that you're part of this day. You're my sister, and nothing will ever change that." Her words hit me harder than I expected, creating an emotional weight in my chest that made it difficult to respond immediately. Here was Ashley, on what should be the most self-focused day of her life, taking time to acknowledge the family dynamics that everyone else seemed determined to ignore. Her kindness made the secrets I was carrying feel even heavier, the knowledge about our father and my true identity creating a barrier between us that she didn't even know existed. The morning flew by in a blur of final preparations, photograph sessions, and nervous energy that built toward the afternoon ceremony. As we lined up for the processional, I caught sight of myself in one of the resort's ornate mirrors and was struck by how different I looked from the other bridesmaids. While they all shared similar coloring and features that complemented Ashley's fair complexion, I stood out like an anomaly in the carefully coordinated wedding party. The difference had never been more apparent than in that moment, surrounded by women who naturally fit the aesthetic my mother had envisioned for her daughter's perfect wedding. The ceremony itself was everything my mother had planned it to be. The string quartet played beautifully, the officiant delivered a heartfelt message about love and commitment, and Ashley and Marcus exchanged vows that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. As I stood at the altar holding Ashley's bouquet, I scanned the crowd and tried to identify faces I recognized among the 300 guests. Most were my parents' friends, business associates, and extended family members who had watched Ashley and me grow up but had always seemed more invested in Ashley's achievements than mine. That's when I spotted him. General James Morrison sat in the back row, his military dress uniform immaculate, and his bearing unmistakably authoritative even in this civilian setting. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to process why my commanding officer's commanding officer would be at my sister's wedding. We had never met personally, though I had briefed his staff on several occasions and had seen him at various military ceremonies and events. His presence here seemed completely out of context, and I couldn't imagine any connection between him and my family's social circle. The general's eyes met mine across the ceremony space, and I saw a flicker of recognition cross his feature. He nodded slightly, the kind of acknowledgement that military personnel give each other in civilian settings, but his expression carried a curiosity that suggested he was also wondering about the connection. I tried to focus on the ceremony, on Ashley's happiness and the beautiful words being spoken, but my mind kept returning to the questions raised by his unexpected presence. As the ceremony concluded and guests began moving toward the cocktail hour, I found myself trapped in the receiving line between Ashley and my mother, shaking hands and accepting congratulations from people I barely knew. Most comments were directed toward Ashley, praising her beauty and the elegance of the ceremony, but several guests made polite conversation with me about my military service. Their questions were general and uninformed, the kind of surface-level inquiries that civilians often make when they encounter someone in uniform, but I answered graciously while continuing to scan the crowd for another glimpse of General Morrison. My mother's behavior during the receiving line was a masterclass in social manipulation. She introduced Ashley to everyone as my brilliant daughter, Dr. Ashley Martinez, emphasizing both her educational achievements and her new married status. When guests asked about me, the introductions were notably different. "This is Jessica, my other daughter," or simply "Jessica, who's in the Army." The contrast was subtle but unmistakable, and I found myself wondering if other people noticed the difference in tone and enthusiasm. The cocktail hour took place on the resort's terrace, with the Rocky Mountains providing a stunning backdrop for photographs and conversation. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and tried to blend into the background while wedding guests mingled and celebrated. Several of Robert's business associates approached me with questions about military life, their curiosity genuine but their understanding limited to what they had seen in movies or read in newspapers. I provided polite responses while keeping one eye on the crowd, still trying to locate General Morrison and understand his connection to this event. Tyler found me near the terrace railing, his champagne glass already empty, and his cheeks flushed with the kind of excitement that came from being at the center of a major family celebration. He threw his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that was both affectionate and slightly possessive, the way he had done since childhood when he wanted to claim my attention. "Pretty amazing, right?" he said, gesturing toward the elegant scene around us. "Mom really outdid herself with this one. Ashley looks like a princess, and Marcus seems like a decent guy. I think this marriage is going to work out well for everyone." His comment about the marriage working out well for everyone struck me as interesting, suggesting that Tyler viewed Ashley's wedding through the lens of family advantage rather than simply personal happiness. This perspective made sense given how our family had always operated, with individual achievements seen as reflections of collective success rather than personal fulfillment. I wondered if Tyler had ever questioned this dynamic or if he had simply accepted it as the natural order of things. As we talked, I noticed my mother approaching with a small group of her real estate colleagues, women who had built successful careers in Denver's competitive market and who shared her appreciation for social status and professional achievement. They were discussing Ashley's medical career and her new husband's family connections, analyzing the marriage in terms of networking opportunities and social advance. When they included me in the conversation, the questions focused on when I planned to leave the military and pursue a civilian career that would allow me to contribute more meaningfully to family gatherings and social events. The implication that my current career was somehow less meaningful or contributory than civilian work was nothing new, but hearing it expressed so directly in front of people I barely knew felt particularly stinging. I provided diplomatic responses about enjoying my military service and finding fulfillment in protecting national security, but I could sense the polite skepticism in their reaction. These women had built their identities around material success and social recognition, and they couldn't understand why anyone would choose a path that offered neither in ways they could easily recognize or appreciate. When the cocktail hour concluded and guests began moving toward the ballroom for dinner, I found myself walking alone, slightly behind the main flow of the crowd. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the resort grounds and creating the kind of golden light that photographers love. For a moment I allowed myself to appreciate the beauty of the setting and the genuine happiness that Ashley had found with Marcus, trying to focus on the positive aspects of the day rather than the undercurrents of tension that seemed to follow me everywhere. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant dining space with round tables covered in crisp white linens and centerpieces that coordinated perfectly with Ashley's bouquet. Each place setting included multiple pieces of silverware, crystal glasses and menu cards printed with the couple's names and wedding date. My mother had spared no expense in creating an atmosphere that would impress her guests and reflect well on the family's social standing. The head table where the wedding party was seated provided a perfect view of the entire room and ensured that we would be visible to all the guests throughout the evening. As I took my assigned seat at the head table, I finally spotted General Morrison again. He had been seated at a table toward the back of the room, surrounded by people I didn't recognize but who carried themselves with the kind of bearing that suggested military or government backgrounds. His presence still puzzled me, but I decided to approach him after dinner to satisfy my curiosity about his connection to the wedding. Perhaps he knew Robert through some business relationship, or maybe he had some other connection to the Chen family that I wasn't aware of. The dinner service began with a salad course that showcased the resort's culinary reputation, followed by a choice of filet mignon or salmon that had been prepared to perfection. Conversation at the head table was lively and celebratory, with Ashley and Marcus sharing stories about their relationship and their plans for the future. Tyler entertained everyone with humorous anecdotes about growing up with two sisters, his natural charm making him the center of attention in ways that had always come easily to him. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the dynamics at our table with new awareness. Robert played the role of proud father beautifully, offering toasts and sharing memories of Ashley's childhood that painted a picture of a loving and supportive family. My mother basked in the compliments about the wedding's elegance and organization, accepting praise for her planning abilities and her success in creating such a memorable event. Both of them seemed genuinely happy and proud, but I couldn't help wondering if their satisfaction came from Ashley's personal happiness or from the social success of the wedding itself. The speeches began after the main course, with the best man delivering a humorous tribute to Marcus that revealed his personality and character in ways that made everyone laugh and cheer. Ashley's maid of honor followed with a heartfelt speech about their friendship and Ashley's journey to finding love, her words bringing tears to many eyes in the audience. When Robert stood to deliver his father of the bride speech, the room fell silent in anticipation of what everyone expected to be an emotional and meaningful moment. Robert's speech was everything a father of the bride speech should be: touching, humorous, and full of love and pride for his daughter. He spoke about watching Ashley grow up, about her determination and kindness, about the joy she had brought to their family and the bright future that lay ahead of her. His words were genuine and heartfelt, and I found myself moved by the obvious love he felt for Ashley despite my own complicated feelings about our relationship. But as Robert continued speaking, I became increasingly aware of the subtext in his words. He talked about my daughter and our family in ways that felt deliberately exclusive, as if he were drawing boundaries around who truly belonged in the Martinez family story. When he mentioned family traditions and values, his eyes never moved in my direction, and when he talked about the future and the legacy Ashley would carry forward, I felt invisible in ways that went beyond simple oversight. The moment that hit me hardest came when Robert raised his glass for the final toast. "To Ashley," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "who has always been everything we hoped for in a daughter, and to Marcus, who we welcome into our family with open arms. May your marriage be filled with the same love and happiness that has always defined the Martinez family." The applause that followed was thunderous, but I sat frozen in my chair, struck by the realization that Robert had just publicly defined family love and happiness in terms that seemed to exclude my entire existence. As the evening continued with dancing and celebration, I found myself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. The weight of everything I had discovered about my biological father, combined with the subtle but persistent exclusion I felt from my own family's narrative, created an emotional burden that was becoming difficult to carry. I smiled and participated in the festivities, but inside I was struggling with questions about identity, belonging, and the price of family secrets that had shaped my entire life. The band began playing romantic songs that drew couples onto the dance floor, and I watched Ashley and Marcus share their first dance as husband and wife. They looked perfect together, genuinely happy and completely absorbed in each other and the moment they were sharing. Seeing Ashley's joy reminded me of why I had come to the wedding despite my own family conflicts, and I tried to focus on her happiness rather than my own complicated emotions. When Tyler asked me to dance, I accepted gratefully, needing the distraction and the connection to someone who had always been uncomplicated in his affection for me. As we moved around the dance floor, he chatted about college, about his plans after graduation, about how proud he was of Ashley and how much he had enjoyed being part of such an elegant wedding. His enthusiasm was infectious, and for a few minutes I was able to set aside my own concerns and simply enjoy being his big sister. But even during this pleasant interlude, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was building toward a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. The combination of family tensions, hidden secrets, and the mysterious presence of General Morrison created an atmosphere that felt charged with possibility and danger. As the evening wore on, I found myself anticipating some kind of revelation or conflict, though I had no idea what form it might take or how it would affect the celebration that my mother had worked so hard to perfect. The cake-cutting ceremony drew everyone's attention back to the head table, where Ashley and Marcus posed for photographs while cutting the elaborate three-tier cake that had been decorated with sugar flowers and delicate piping. The crowd cheered as they fed each other the first bites, and the photographer captured every moment of their playful interaction. It was a scene of pure happiness and celebration, exactly the kind of moment that would be treasured in family albums and remembered fondly for years to come. As the evening began winding down and some guests started making their departures, I realized that I still hadn't had an opportunity to speak with General Morrison or understand his connection to the wedding. The questions about his presence had been nagging at me throughout the evening, and I decided that I needed to satisfy my curiosity before the night ended. I excused myself from the head table and began making my way across the ballroom toward where I had last seen him seated. The crowd was beginning to thin out, and the energy in the room was shifting from celebration to the kind of relaxed contentment that comes at the end of a successful event. Ashley and Marcus were still greeting guests and accepting congratulations, while my mother and Robert worked the room like the accomplished hosts they were, ensuring that everyone felt appreciated and valued. Tyler had found a group of young people near his age and was entertaining them with stories that had everyone laughing and engaged. As I approached the back of the ballroom, I could see General Morrison more clearly. He was standing with several other people who definitely had military bearing, engaged in conversation that looked serious despite the celebratory atmosphere around them. When he noticed me approaching, he excused himself from his group and walked toward me with the kind of purposeful stride that I recognized from countless military encounters. General Morrison's handshake was firm and professional, exactly what I expected from someone of his rank and reputation. His eyes held the kind of intelligence that made it clear why he had risen to such high levels in military leadership. And when he spoke, his voice carried the authority that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Agent Martinez," he said, using my operational designation rather than my rank, "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here. I wasn't aware you had family connections in Denver's social circle." The way he phrased his observation suggested that he had done some mental calculating about my presence at such an elaborate wedding, and I realized that my family's wealth and social status probably seemed incongruous with what he knew about my background and career choices. Most military intelligence officers didn't grow up in million-dollar homes or have family members who could afford to spend six figures on a single wedding. The disconnect between my professional identity and my family's lifestyle was something I had never really considered from an outside perspective. "My sister Ashley is the bride," I explained, gesturing toward the head table where Ashley was still accepting congratulations from guests. "Though I have to admit, I'm equally surprised to see you here, sir. I can't imagine how you know my family." The question hung between us as I tried to process the implications of his presence. If General Morrison knew my family through some connection I wasn't aware of, it could explain some of the mysteries that had been puzzling me about my own background and identity. His expression shifted slightly, taking on the kind of careful neutrality that experienced military leaders use when they're processing unexpected information. "I'm here because I received an invitation from someone who thought I should meet you in a more informal setting," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "Someone who believed that there were things about your family history that you deserved to know, and that I was uniquely positioned to help clarify." The cryptic nature of his response sent a chill through me, and I felt the same sensation I had experienced during classified briefings when critical information was about to be revealed. The general's presence wasn't coincidental or social. It was purposeful and connected to the secrets I had been uncovering about my biological father. Someone had orchestrated this meeting, and I suspected that someone had knowledge about Colonel Michael Torres and his connection to my family that went beyond what I had discovered through my own investigation. "Sir, I think there may be some confusion," I said, trying to maintain professional composure while my mind raced through possibilities. "I'm not sure what family history you're referring to, or who might have suggested that you and I should meet." Even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't entirely truthful. The timing of his appearance, combined with my recent discoveries about my biological father, seemed too coincidental to be random chance. General Morrison glanced around the ballroom, taking in the elegant surroundings and the well-dressed crowd of wedding guests. His assessment was thorough and professional, the kind of situational awareness that military leaders develop through years of experience in complex environments. "Agent Martinez," he said finally, "I think this might not be the appropriate setting for the conversation we need to have. Perhaps we could step outside onto the terrace where we can speak more privately." The suggestion felt both reasonable and ominous, and I found myself following him toward the French doors that led to the resort's outdoor space. As we walked, I noticed several guests watching our interaction with curiosity, probably wondering why a military officer was having what appeared to be a serious conversation with one of the bridesmaids. The contrast between my formal bridesmaid dress and his military uniform made us stand out in a crowd of civilians celebrating a social occasion. The terrace was quieter than the ballroom, with only a few other guests enjoying the cool evening air and the stunning view of the mountain. General Morrison chose a spot near the railing where we could speak without being overheard, and his demeanor shifted from social politeness to the kind of focused attention that preceded important military briefing. I felt my own posture straightening in response, years of training creating automatic responses to his commanding presence. "Agent Martinez," he began, his voice low but clear. "3 weeks ago I received a call from someone who introduced herself as Lisa Torres. She explained that she was the sister of Colonel Michael Torres, and that she had recently been contacted by someone she believed to be her brother's daughter. She was concerned that this person might not be aware of certain benefits and information that were rightfully hers, and she asked if I might be able to help facilitate a conversation." The mention of Lisa Torres confirmed my suspicions about the general's presence, but it also raised new questions about how she had managed to make contact with someone of his rank and influence. Military families don't typically have direct access to 3-star generals, and I wondered what connections or circumstances had made such a conversation possible. The fact that Lisa had taken the initiative to reach out on my behalf suggested that the Torres family's concern about my situation went beyond simple family sentiment. "Lisa Torres is my biological father's sister," I said, deciding that honesty was the best approach given the circumstance. "I contacted her recently after discovering some information about my background that my family had never shared with me, but I'm not sure why she would have contacted you, or how she would have known to do so." The general's expression suggested that he had additional information that would clarify these connections, and I waited for him to continue. "Colonel Torres and I served together early in our careers," General Morrison explained, his tone carrying the respect that military officers have for fallen comrades. "He was an exceptional officer and a good friend, and his death in Afghanistan was a significant loss to the Special Forces community." When Lisa contacted me, she explained that Michael's daughter had been raised by another family and might not be aware of her father's service record or the benefits that were available to her. The revelation that General Morrison had known my biological father personally added an entirely new dimension to our conversation. This wasn't just about military records or bureaucratic procedures. It was about personal relationships and the kind of loyalty that military officers maintain toward their fallen brothers in arms. The general's interest in my situation wasn't purely professional. It was personal in ways that I was only beginning to understand. "Lisa also mentioned that she was concerned about the circumstances surrounding your adoption," he continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "She indicated that there might have been some irregularities in how your father's benefits were handled, and that certain notifications and payments might not have reached you or your family as they should have." The implications of what he was saying began to sink in, and I felt a growing sense of anger about the extent to which my mother had apparently hidden information that was rightfully mine. As we continued talking, I became aware of movement inside the ballroom, and I glanced through the French doors to see that the evening's festivities were continuing without any indication that my absence had been noted. Ashley and Marcus were still greeting guests and posing for photographs, while my mother and Robert worked the room with the skill of experienced hosts. The contrast between the celebration inside and the serious conversation taking place on the terrace felt surreal, as if I were living in 2 different realities simultaneously. "General Morrison," I said, trying to process the information he had shared, "I think there's a lot about my family situation that I'm only beginning to understand. My mother has never mentioned Colonel Torres or acknowledged that Robert Martinez isn't my biological father. Everything I know about my background has come from my own investigation over the past few weeks." The admission felt vulnerable, but I sensed that complete honesty was necessary if I wanted to understand the full scope of what had been hidden from me. The general's expression softened slightly, and I could see the compassion that lay beneath his professional demeanor. "Agent Martinez, I want you to know that your biological father was proud of you even though he never had the chance to see you grow up. He talked about his daughter often, and he made sure that provisions were in place to support your education and future opportunities. The fact that you've achieved so much in your military career would have made him incredibly proud." His words hit me with unexpected emotional force, and I felt tears threatening to spill over despite my efforts to maintain composure. The idea that my biological father had been proud of me, had made plans for my future, and had spoken about me with affection created a stark contrast to the emotional distance I had always experienced from Robert. For the first time in my life I felt truly seen and valued by a father figure even though that father had been dead for 25 years. "There's something else you should know," General Morrison continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and retrieving a sealed envelope. "Lisa Torres asked me to give this to you when we met. She said it contains information about your father's service record, as well as documentation about the benefits and insurance policies that were established for you. She also included some personal items that she thought you should have." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with more than just the documents it contained. This was tangible proof of a relationship and a history that had been denied to me for my entire life, evidence of a father's love and planning that had been deliberately concealed from me. The fact that Lisa Torres had preserved these items for decades, waiting for an opportunity to share them with me, spoke to the kind of family loyalty and dedication that I had never experienced from the people who had raised me. As I held the envelope, I became aware of voices carrying from inside the ballroom, and I realized that the evening's formal program was continuing with toasts and speeches. The sound of laughter and applause created a backdrop that felt increasingly disconnected from the conversation I was having with General Morrison. The celebration of my sister's marriage was proceeding exactly as my mother had planned, while I was learning truths about my own identity that would fundamentally change how I understood my place in the family. "Agent Martinez," the general said, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of leadership experience. "I want you to know that you have support in the military community that extends beyond your current assignment. Your father's friends and colleagues have always been interested in your welfare, and there are people who would be honored to help you navigate any challenges that might arise from learning about your background." The offer of support felt both generous and necessary, and I realized that I would probably need guidance from people who understood both military culture and the complexities of family secret. The general's willingness to involve himself in my personal situation suggested that the bonds between military officers extended beyond professional relationships, and that my father's reputation and service record had created lasting connections that could benefit me, even decades after his death. "I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this information," I admitted, gesturing toward the envelope. "My family has built their entire identity around a story that apparently isn't true, and I'm not sure how to confront that without destroying relationships that, despite their problems, are still important to me." The dilemma felt overwhelming, and I appreciated having someone with General Morrison's experience and wisdom to discuss the situation with. Before the general could respond, the French doors to the terrace opened, and my mother stepped outside, her expression curious but not yet concerned. She had obviously noticed my extended absence from the wedding festivities, and had come to investigate, though she clearly hadn't expected to find me in conversation with a military officer. Her appearance created an immediate shift in the atmosphere, and I felt the tension that had been building throughout the evening begin to crystallize into something more confrontational. "Jessica," my mother said, her voice carrying the polite firmness that she used when she wanted to control a situation without creating a scene. "I've been looking for you." Ashley is about to throw her bouquet, and she specifically asked for all the bridesmaids to be present. Her eyes moved to General Morrison, taking in his uniform and bearing with the assessment skills that had made her successful in real estate negotiations. "Mrs. Martinez," the general said, extending his hand in a gesture that was both polite and formal. "I'm General James Morrison. I was just having a conversation with Agent Martinez about her military service." His introduction was carefully neutral, revealing nothing about the actual content of our discussion while establishing his authority and position in a way that demanded respect. My mother's handshake was brief, and I could see her mental calculations as she processed the general's presence and tried to understand why he would be at Ashley's wedding. Her social instincts were excellent, and she quickly recognized that General Morrison represented someone of significant importance, whose presence at the wedding needed to be acknowledged and managed appropriately. "General Morrison," she said, her voice taking on the warm professionalism that she used with important clients, "how wonderful that you could join us for Ashley's wedding. I hope you're enjoying the celebration." The polite exchange felt loaded with undercurrents that my mother couldn't fully understand, and I found myself caught between the conversation I had been having with the general and the family obligations that my mother was trying to enforce. The envelope in my hands felt like evidence of secrets that could no longer be contained, and I sensed that the evening was approaching a tipping point where hidden truths would be revealed whether I was ready for them or not. "Actually, Miss Martinez," General Morrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I was hoping to have a conversation with you as well. I believe there are some matters related to Agent Martinez's background that might be of interest to your family." The way he phrased his statement suggested that he was prepared to discuss the information about my biological father, and I felt a surge of anxiety about how my mother would respond to having her carefully constructed narrative challenged. My mother's expression shifted from polite hospitality to cautious concern, and I could see her trying to assess what kind of information the general might have, and how it could affect her family's reputation or social standing. Her instincts for self-preservation were finely tuned, and she clearly sensed that this conversation had the potential to create problems that could extend far beyond the wedding celebration. "I'm not sure what you mean, General," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Jessica's background is quite straightforward. She's our daughter, and we're very proud of her military service, though we hope she'll eventually transition to a civilian career that would allow her to contribute more meaningfully to family life." The response was perfectly crafted to deflect inquiry while simultaneously diminishing the importance of my military achievement. The general's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see the disapproval in his eyes as he processed my mother's dismissive attitude toward my career. His respect for military service was genuine and deeply held, and comments that suggested military careers were somehow less meaningful than civilian pursuits clearly struck him as inappropriate and offensive. The tension between them was becoming palpable, and I realized that a confrontation was becoming inevitable. "Miss Martinez," General Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of command responsibility, "I think there may be some information about Agent Martinez's background that you haven't shared with her. Information that she has a right to know and that affects her understanding of her own identity and family history." His words were carefully chosen but unmistakably direct, and I could see my mother's facade of polite control beginning to crack under the pressure of his challenge. The bouquet toss was forgotten as the three of us stood on the terrace, engaged in a conversation that was rapidly escalating toward a confrontation that would change everything. The sounds of celebration from inside the ballroom continued, but they seemed to come from a different world than the one where family secrets were being exposed and long-hidden truths were demanding to be acknowledged. I clutched the envelope tighter, knowing that its contents would provide the evidence needed to support whatever revelations were about to unfold. My mother's eyes moved between the general and me, and I could see her calculating the potential damage that this conversation could cause to her carefully constructed family narrative. The wedding celebration that she had planned so meticulously was about to become the setting for the kind of family drama that she had spent decades trying to avoid, and I could see the panic beginning to build behind her composed exterior. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," she said, her voice becoming more strained as she struggled to maintain control of the situation. "Jessica is our daughter, and any information about her background would certainly be something that we would have shared with her. I'm not sure what you think you know about our family, but I can assure you that we have always been completely honest with our children." The lies came so easily that I wondered if she had convinced herself they were true, or if she was simply so committed to the narrative she had constructed that she was willing to defend it even when confronted with evidence to the contrary. The general's presence and authority made it clear that he had information that could challenge her claims, but she seemed prepared to maintain her position regardless of the consequence. General Morrison reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder that I hadn't noticed before, his movements deliberate and professional. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "I have here copies of military records, insurance documents, and correspondence that tell a very different story about Agent Martinez's background. These documents indicate that her biological father was Colonel Michael Torres, who was killed in action in Afghanistan when she was 3 years old, and that significant benefits and information were available to her that were never claimed or shared." The folder in his hands represented evidence that could no longer be dismissed or explained away,
and I watched my mother's face as she realized that her carefully guarded secrets were being exposed by someone with the authority and documentation to make his claims credible. The general's military bearing and obvious access to official records made it clear that this wasn't speculation or gossip, it was documented fact that could be verified through multiple sources. Furthermore, the general continued, his tone becoming more stern, these records indicate that Colonel Torres's family attempted to maintain contact with Agent Martinez after his death, and that their efforts were systematically blocked or ignored. The Torres family has been concerned about Agent Martinez's welfare for decades, and they have been trying to ensure that she received the support and recognition that her father intended for her. The accusation was clear and damning, and I could see my mother struggling to find a response that would allow her to maintain her position without directly contradicting evidence that was being presented by a three-star general. The social and professional authority that General Morrison represented made it nearly impossible for her to dismiss his claims, and the public setting of the wedding made it equally difficult for her to avoid addressing them. As the confrontation intensified, I became aware that other wedding guests were beginning to notice the serious conversation taking place on the terrace.
Several people had moved closer to the French doors, and I could see curious faces peering through the glass, trying to understand why one of the bridesmaids was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a military officer. The private family drama that my mother had worked so hard to contain was about to become a public spectacle that would be witnessed by 300 of Denver's social elite. The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever happened next would fundamentally change the trajectory of my life and my relationships with the people who had raised me. The envelope in my hands contained proof of a father's love and planning that had been denied to me for 28 years, while the general's presence represented validation and support from the military community that had become my chosen family. The choice between maintaining family harmony and pursuing truth and justice was about to be made for me by circumstances that were spiraling beyond anyone's control. My mother's composure was cracking under the pressure of the general's challenge, and I could see the panic and anger building behind her carefully maintained facade. The wedding celebration that was supposed to showcase her family's success and social standing was about to become the setting for revelations that would expose decades of deception and manipulation. The confrontation that I had been dreading was finally about to begin, and I realized that there was no going back to the comfortable lies that had defined my understanding of my own identity for my entire life. The weight of the sealed envelope in my hands felt like it contained the answers to questions I had been asking my entire life, without even realizing it. General Morrison's mention of military benefits and insurance policies that had never been claimed created a new understanding of just how extensive my mother's deception had been. This wasn't simply about hiding the identity of my biological father. It was about deliberately withholding financial resources and family connections that could have fundamentally changed the course of my life and education. As my mother stood frozen on the terrace, her face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, and calculation, I found myself opening the envelope with trembling fingers. The first document I pulled out was a military service record for Colonel Michael Torres, and even in the dim lighting from the ballroom, I could see the impressive list of commendations and achievements that marked his career. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge, and numerous other decorations told the story of a soldier who had distinguished himself through courage and dedication to duty. The photograph attached to his service record showed a man who looked remarkably like me, with the same dark hair, olive complexion, and serious expression that I saw in my own mirror every morning. The resemblance was so striking that it eliminated any remaining doubt about our biological relationship, and I felt a surge of connection to this father I had never known, but whose genes had clearly shaped both my appearance and my instinctive attraction to military service. General Morrison watched my reaction as I examined the documents, his expression reflecting both professional satisfaction at providing important information and personal compassion for the emotional impact of these revelations. His relationship with my biological father had clearly been meaningful, and I could see that helping me understand my heritage was more than just a professional courtesy. It was a personal mission to honor the memory of a fallen comrade. Agent Martinez, the general said, his voice gentle but authoritative, your father established a comprehensive benefits package specifically designed to support your education and future opportunities. The service members group life insurance policy alone was worth $400,000, with additional educational benefits through the Survivors and Dependents Educational Assistance Program. These funds have been accruing interest in a special account maintained by the Department of Veterans Affairs for over 2 decades. The numbers he quoted were staggering, representing more money than I had ever imagined having access to, and certainly enough to have paid for any college education I might have chosen without requiring scholarships or family financial support. The realization that this money had been sitting unused while I worked multiple jobs during high school and carefully managed my military pay to afford basic necessities created a burning anger that threatened to overwhelm my professional composure. My mother's face had gone pale as she processed the financial implications of what the general was revealing. $400,000, plus interest accumulated over 25 years, represented a substantial sum that could have provided security and opportunities for our entire family. Her real estate business, while successful, had required years of building and investment, and I wondered if access to these military benefits might have changed the financial pressures that had sometimes strained our household during my childhood. "There's more," General Morrison continued, pulling additional documents from his folder. "Colonel Torres also established a trust fund through his military savings and investments, specifically designated for his daughter's education and career development. The trust was designed to provide ongoing support through college, graduate school, and professional development programs. The current value of this trust, including investment growth over the past 25 years, is approximately $800,000. The second figure hit me like a physical blow, and I had to steady myself against the terrace railing as the full scope of what had been hidden from me became clear. More than $1 million in combined benefits and trust funds had been available to me throughout my childhood and young adulthood, money that could have paid for any education I wanted, eliminated the financial stress that had sometimes overshadowed family decisions, and provided the kind of security that would have fundamentally changed my relationship with my family. I looked at my mother, searching her face for some explanation or justification for why she had never pursued these benefits or even informed me of their existence. Her expression was a mixture of defiance and fear, and I could see her calculating how to respond to accusations that were becoming impossible to deny or deflect. The evidence that General Morrison was presenting was official, documented, and verifiable through military channels that she couldn't challenge or dismiss. "Patricia," I said, using her first name for the first time in my adult life, "did you know about these benefits? Did you know that my biological father had made provisions for my education and future?" The questions felt dangerous, threatening to shatter the last remaining pretense of family unity, but I needed to understand the extent of her knowledge and the deliberateness of her deception. Her silence was more damning than any admission could have been, and I watched her struggle to find words that would allow her to maintain some semblance of moral authority in the situation. The general's presence made it impossible for her to simply dismiss the conversation or demand that we discuss family matters privately, and the public setting of the wedding created pressure for her to respond in ways that wouldn't create an obvious scene. "Jessica," she finally said, her voice strained and defensive, "you have to understand that I was trying to protect you from complications that could have disrupted the stability we were building as a family. Robert was willing to adopt you and provide everything you needed, and I thought it was better to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past." Her explanation felt hollow and self-serving, designed more to protect her own decisions than to acknowledge the impact they had on my life. General Morrison's expression hardened as he listened to my mother's justification, and I could see the disapproval that came from his military perspective on duty, honor, and taking responsibility for one's actions. The idea that a surviving spouse would deliberately ignore benefits intended for a fallen soldier's child clearly offended his sense of justice and proper conduct, and his professional demeanor shifted to something more personally invested in the outcome of this confrontation. "Martinez," the general said, his voice carrying the authority that came from decades of military leadership, "these benefits weren't optional suggestions that could be ignored for convenience. They were legal entitlements established by a father who died serving his country, specifically designed to ensure his daughter's welfare and opportunity. The Department of Veterans Affairs has been attempting to contact Agent Martinez about these benefits for years, and their correspondence was apparently never forwarded to her." The accusation was clear and serious, implying that my mother had not only failed to pursue benefits that were rightfully mine, but had actively prevented me from receiving information about their existence. The systematic nature of this deception suggested a level of deliberate manipulation that went far beyond simple family dysfunction or poor communication, and I felt my anger building towards something that might become uncontrollable if I didn't find ways to channel it constructively. As I continued examining the documents in the envelope, I found copies of letters from the Department of Veterans Affairs, addressed to both my mother and me at various addresses over the years. The correspondence showed repeated attempts to contact us about survivor benefits, educational assistance programs, and other resources available to military dependents. The fact that I had never seen any of these letters confirmed that my mother had been intercepting official correspondence and making unilateral decisions about my access to information and resource. One particularly significant document was a letter from the Veterans Administration dated just 6 months after my 18th birthday, informing me that I was eligible to begin receiving monthly survivor benefits that could continue through my college years and beyond. The letter included detailed information about application procedures and contact numbers for veterans advocates who could help me navigate the benefits system. The monthly payments described in the letter would have provided enough financial support to eliminate most of my concerns about college costs and living expenses. Another document that caught my attention was a copy of my biological father's last will and testament, which had been filed with Military Legal Services before his final deployment. In addition to the insurance policies and trust funds that General Morrison had mentioned, the will included personal items that were supposed to be given to me when I reached adulthood: his military medals and decorations, personal photographs, letters he had written for me to read at various stages of my life, and other mementos that were meant to help me understand his character and value. The existence of these personal items added an emotional dimension to the financial revelations, and I felt a profound sense of loss for the connection to my father's memory that had been denied to me throughout my childhood and young adulthood. These weren't just material objects, they were tangible links to a parent who had loved me enough to plan for my future even while facing the dangers of military service in a combat zone. "Where are these personal items now?" I asked General Morrison, my voice tight with emotion. The medals and photographs and letters that he left for me. The thought that these irreplaceable mementos might have been lost or destroyed over the years created a panic that was almost overwhelming, and I realized that I cared more about recovering these personal connections to my father than I did about the financial benefit. "They're being held by the Torres family in Phoenix," the general replied, his voice gentle with understanding of the emotional significance of these items. "Lisa and David Torres have been preserving everything, hoping that someday they would have the opportunity to share your father's memory with you. They have photographs from his childhood, letters he wrote home during his deployments, and all of his military decorations and commendations." The knowledge that my biological grandparents had been preserving my father's memory and waiting for decades to share it with me created a new understanding of family loyalty and dedication that contrasted sharply with the deception and manipulation I was discovering in my adoptive family. The Torres family had maintained their connection to me through love and hope, while my mother had actively worked to sever those connections for her own convenience and comfort. As the implications of these revelations continued to sink in, I became aware that the confrontation on the terrace was beginning to attract attention from other wedding guests. Several people had moved closer to the French doors, and I could see curious faces peering through the glass, trying to understand why one of the bridesmaids was engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion with a military officer and the mother of the bride. Ashley's voice called from inside the ballroom, asking if anyone had seen me because she was ready for the bouquet toss and wanted all the bridesmaids to participate. The request felt surreal given the magnitude of the conversation taking place on the terrace, and I realized that my sister's perfect wedding was about to be overshadowed by family drama that would be remembered long after the romantic details were forgotten. My mother seemed to recognize the growing public nature of our confrontation, and I could see her calculating how to minimize the damage to her social reputation while maintaining some control over the narrative. Her real estate career depended on her image as a successful, stable family woman, and the revelation of decades-old deceptions about military benefits and family relationships could undermine the professional credibility she had worked years to establish. "Jessica," she said, her voice taking on the commanding tone she used when she wanted to end conversations that weren't going in her favor, I think we need to discuss this privately after the wedding when we can have a proper family conversation without disrupting Ashley's special day. Her attempt to postpone the confrontation was transparently designed to give her time to develop strategies for damage control, and I could see that she had no intention of acknowledging the extent of her deception or taking responsibility for its consequence. General Morrison stepped forward, his military bearing making it clear that he wasn't going to allow the conversation to be dismissed or postponed at my mother's convenience. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of command responsibility, "Agent Martinez has a right to understand her full situation immediately. These benefits and resources have been available to her for over a decade, and every day of delay represents opportunities and security that continue to be denied to her." The general's support felt like a lifeline in a situation that was becoming increasingly overwhelming, and I realized that having someone with his authority and military connections advocating for my interests changed the power dynamics of the family confrontation significantly. My mother could dismiss my questions and concerns as ungrateful or disrespectful, but she couldn't ignore or intimidate a three-star general who had official documentation to support his claim. Furthermore, General Morrison continued, his tone becoming more stern, "The Department of Veterans Affairs has legal obligations to ensure that military dependents receive the benefits they're entitled to. The systematic failure to notify Agent Martinez about these resources could constitute a serious violation of federal regulations, and there may be investigations required to determine how this situation was allowed to continue for so many years." The mention of potential federal investigations sent a visible shock through my mother's composure, and I could see her beginning to understand that this wasn't just a family disagreement that could be managed through social pressure or emotional manipulation. Military benefits were governed by federal law, and the deliberate obstruction of a service member's dependents' access to those benefits could have legal consequences that extended far beyond family relationships. As I continued reading through the documents, I found evidence of my mother's active role in preventing me from receiving information about my military heritage and benefits. Several letters from the Veterans Administration had been returned to sender with notations indicating that the intended recipient was no longer at this address, despite the fact that we had lived at the same location for years. Other correspondence had been marked refused delivery, suggesting that someone had actively rejected official mail rather than simply failing to forward it. The pattern of deliberate obstruction was clear and damning, and I felt my anger crystallizing into something more focused and determined than the general resentment I had carried for years about my family's treatment. This wasn't just about emotional neglect or favoritism. It was about the systematic denial of resources and opportunities that my biological father had specifically intended for me, and that had been guaranteed by federal law and military regulation. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil I was experiencing, "these documents show that you actively prevented me from receiving information about my father's benefits. You didn't just fail to pursue them, you deliberately blocked them from reaching. You cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in educational support and financial security, and you denied me the chance to know about my father's service and sacrifice." My mother's facade of wounded innocence was cracking under the weight of the documentary evidence, and I could see her struggling to find explanations that would justify her actions, without admitting to the level of calculated deception that the records revealed. The public setting and the presence of General Morrison made it impossible for her to use the emotional manipulation tactics that had been effective in private family confrontations throughout my childhood. "I was trying to protect you," she said, her voice becoming more desperate as she repeated the justification that was clearly her primary defense. "Military life is dangerous and unpredictable, and I thought you would be better off with a stable civilian family that could provide consistent support and opportunity. Robert was willing to be your father in every way that mattered, and I thought that was more valuable than money or abstract connections to someone who was gone." Her explanation revealed the fundamental selfishness that had motivated her decisions, prioritizing her own comfort and convenience over my rights and welfare. The choice to create a stable civilian family might have been understandable if it had been made honestly, and with my knowledge, but the systematic deception and denial of my legal entitlements
transformed a difficult family situation into something that approached criminal negligence. General Morrison's expression reflected the disgust that any military officer would feel toward someone who had betrayed the trust and sacrifice of a fallen comrade, and I could see that his personal investment in the situation was deepening as the scope of my mother's deception became clear. The military community took care of its own, especially the families of those who had died in service, and her actions represented a violation of values that were fundamental to military culture. Martinez, the general said, his voice cold with controlled anger, Colonel Torres died serving his country, and he made specific provisions to ensure his daughter's welfare and opportunity. Your decision to ignore those provisions and deny Agent Martinez access to her rightful benefits represents a betrayal of his sacrifice and a violation of the trust that military families place in each other. The moral authority of his condemnation was undeniable, and I could see my mother beginning to understand that she had created a situation that couldn't be resolved through her usual combination of social pressure and emotional manipulation. The military community represented a different set of values and obligations than the civilian social circles where she had built her reputation, and General Morrison's presence brought those military values directly into her carefully controlled environment. As the confrontation intensified, I became aware that Ashley had emerged from the ballroom and was approaching our group with a puzzled expression. Her wedding dress rustled softly as she walked, and her face showed the kind of concern that came from sensing family tension even when she didn't understand its source. The sight of her approaching made me realize that the private family drama was about to become a public spectacle that would overshadow her wedding celebration and create memories that would last far beyond this evening. "Mom? Jess? What's going on out here?" Ashley asked, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being the bride, whose special day was being disrupted. "People are asking where you are, and I can't throw my bouquet without all my bridesmaids present." Her focus on the wedding logistics revealed that she hadn't yet grasped the significance of the conversation taking place, but her presence changed the dynamics by adding another family member who would need to understand and respond to the revelations about our family history. The moment felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that whatever happened next would fundamentally change our family relationships and force everyone to confront truths that had been hidden for decades. The envelope full of military documents in my hands represented evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, while General Morrison's presence provided the authority and support needed to ensure that these revelations would be taken seriously rather than buried under family pressure for unity and discretion. My mother looked between Ashley and me, clearly calculating how to manage the situation without completely destroying the evening she had worked so hard to perfect. The wedding celebration represented the culmination of months of planning and thousands of dollars in expenses, and I could see her desperation to find some way to contain the damage while maintaining the facade of family harmony that was so important to her social identity. But the truth had momentum now, supported by official documentation and military authority that couldn't be intimidated or dismissed. The benefits and heritage that my biological father had intended for me were finally within reach, along with connections to the Torres family who had been waiting decades to share his memory with me. The choice between maintaining comfortable lies and pursuing authentic relationships based on truth was no longer mine to make. The circumstances had made that decision for all of us. Ashley's presence on the terrace shifted the entire dynamic of our confrontation. Her wedding dress, creating an almost ethereal contrast against the mountain backdrop, while her expression transformed from bridal joy to growing concern as she took in the tense body language between our mother, General Morrison, and myself. Her eyes moved from the military documents in my hands to the general's stern expression, then to our mother's pale face, and I could see her analytical mind beginning to process that this wasn't simply a case of wedding day stress or minor family disagreement. "General Morrison," I said, realizing that introductions were necessary, "this is my sister Ashley, the bride. Ashley, this is General James Morrison from Fort Bragg. He's been sharing some information about our family history that apparently none of us knew about." The weight of what I was about to reveal to Ashley felt enormous, knowing that her understanding of our family was about to be shattered just as thoroughly as mine had been over the past few weeks. Ashley extended her hand to the general with the poise that had always made her successful in social situations, but her eyes remained alert and questioning as she tried to understand why a high-ranking military officer would be at her wedding with what appeared to be official document. General Morrison, it's an honor to meet you. I hope you're enjoying the celebration, though it seems like you and my family are discussing something rather serious. Her diplomatic response revealed the social skills that had made her popular throughout medical school and residency, but I could see the underlying tension in her posture as she waited for an explanation that would help her understand why her wedding reception had become the setting for what was clearly a significant family confrontation.
The general's military bearing, and the formal documents visible in both his hands and mine, made it obvious that this wasn't a casual social conversation. Dr. Martinez, General Morrison said, using Ashley's new married title with the respect that came naturally to him when addressing accomplished professionals. I'm afraid I'm here on a matter that concerns your sister's military service and some information about your family background that she's recently discovered. The timing is unfortunate, given your wedding celebration, but these are matters that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. His explanation was carefully worded to acknowledge the inappropriateness of the timing, while making it clear that the issues being discussed were too important to be delayed for social convenience. The general's military experience had taught him how to deliver difficult information with appropriate gravity, and his tone conveyed that whatever was being discussed had serious implications that extended beyond family dynamic. Ashley's medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure and gather information systematically before making decisions, and I could see those skills engaging as she processed the general's words. "What kind of information about our family background?" she asked, her voice steady despite the obvious concern in her expression. "And what does this have to do with Jess's military service?" The question hung in the air as I struggled with how to begin explaining decades of deception and hidden family history to someone who had always believed she understood her place in our family structure. Ashley had grown up with the same story I had, believing that Robert was my biological father and that our family history was straightforward and uncomplicated. The revelation that our mother had been hiding fundamental truths about my identity would be as shocking to her as it had been to me. "Ashley," I said, my voice carrying the weight of the decision to share information that would change her understanding of our family forever. "It turns out that Robert isn't my biological father. My real father was a military officer named Colonel Michael Torres, who was killed in Afghanistan when I was 3 years old. Mom has been hiding this from me my entire life, along with substantial military benefits and family connections that should have been available to me." I watched my sister's face as she processed this information, seeing the same progression of emotions that I had experienced: confusion, disbelief, and then growing anger as the implications became clear. Ashley had always been protective of me, despite our different paths in life, and I could see her beginning to understand that the favoritism and emotional distance I had experienced weren't just personality conflicts, but symptoms of a much deeper deception. "That's impossible," Ashley said, though her voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. "Mom would never hide something that important from you. There has to be some misunderstanding or confusion about the record." Her instinct was to defend our mother, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression as she looked at the official military documents and considered the general's obvious authority and access to verified information. General Morrison stepped forward with the folder of documentation, his professional demeanor making it clear that these weren't allegations or theories, but established facts supported by official records. "Martinez, I understand this is difficult information to process, especially during your wedding celebration. However, these documents from the Department of Veterans Affairs and Military Personnel Records provide clear evidence of Agent Martinez's biological parentage and the benefits that have been available to her since her father's death." He opened the folder and showed Ashley copies of the same documents that had convinced me of the truth: my biological father's service record, the insurance policies, the trust fund documentation, and the correspondence from the Veterans Administration that had been intercepted and never forwarded to me. The weight of official documentation was undeniable, and I could see Ashley's medical training engaging as she examined the evidence with the same systematic approach she used for patient diagnosis. Ashley's face went through a range of expressions as she reviewed the documents, her analytical mind processing the implications of what she was seeing while her emotional response struggled to catch up with the magnitude of the deception that was being revealed. When she looked up from the papers, her eyes held a mixture of shock and growing anger that I recognized from my own reaction to learning these truths. "Mom," Ashley said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that she used in medical settings when she needed clear answers to critical questions. "Is this true? Has Jess's biological father really been Colonel Torres? And have you been hiding military benefits that belonged to her?" The directness of her question reflected her medical training, where accurate information was essential for proper treatment and where deception could have life-threatening consequences. Our mother's composure finally cracked under the pressure of being confronted by both of her daughters simultaneously, and I could see the panic that came from realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was collapsing in the most public possible setting. The wedding celebration continued inside the ballroom, with guests expecting both the bride and the mother of the bride to return for the evening's final festivities. But the family drama unfolding on the terrace had taken on a momentum that couldn't be controlled or contained. "Girls, please," our mother said, her voice becoming more desperate as she struggled to find some way to regain control of the situation. "This is Ashley's wedding day. Whatever questions you have about family history can be discussed tomorrow, when we can have a proper conversation without disrupting such an important celebration. There are 300 guests inside who are expecting us to continue with the evening's program." Her attempt to use social pressure and guilt about the wedding celebration was transparently manipulative, and I could see that Ashley was becoming increasingly angry about the suggestion that family deception should be overlooked for the sake of social appearances. Medical school had taught Ashley to value truth and accuracy above comfort or convenience, and the idea that fundamental lies about family identity could be dismissed as inappropriate timing clearly offended her sense of justice and integrity. "Mom," Ashley said, her voice becoming more forceful, "if what General Morrison is showing us is true, then you've been lying to Jess for her entire life about something as basic as who her father was. You've denied her access to military benefits that could have paid for her education and provided financial security, and you've kept her from knowing about family members who wanted to be part of her life. This isn't something that can wait until tomorrow because it's inconvenient timing." The support from Ashley felt like validation that I hadn't expected but desperately needed, and I realized that my sister's medical training had given her perspective on the importance of accurate information and the dangers of systematic deception. Her willingness to prioritize truth over social convenience created an alliance that changed the power dynamics of the family confrontation significantly. General Morrison nodded approvingly at Ashley's response, his military experience recognizing the kind of moral courage that was required to choose difficult truths over comfortable lies. "Martinez, your sister has been denied access to over $1 million in military benefits and educational support, along with connections to her biological father's family who have been trying to contact her for decades. These aren't minor details that can be postponed for social convenience. They're fundamental issues of identity and legal entitlement." The financial figure hit Ashley with visible impact, and I could see her calculating the opportunities and security that such resources could have provided throughout my childhood and education. As someone who had worked her way through medical school and understood the financial pressures of higher education, she immediately grasped the significance of what had been denied to me and the impact it could have had on my choices and opportunities. "Over $1 million, Ashley repeated, her voice reflecting both shock and growing outrage. "Mom, you let Jess struggle with college finances and worry about student loans when there was over $1 million in military benefits available to her. You watched her work multiple jobs during high school and manage every penny of her military pay while you were hiding resources that belonged to her." The accusation was devastating in its accuracy, and I could see our mother struggling to find justifications that would make her actions seem reasonable or protective rather than selfish and manipulative. The contrast between Ashley's privileged educational path and my constant financial concerns had always been attributed to different choices and priorities, but the revelation of hidden resources reframed those differences as consequences of deliberate deception. As the confrontation intensified, other wedding guests began appearing on the terrace, drawn by the increasingly heated voices and the obvious tension that was radiating from our family group. Tyler emerged from the ballroom looking confused and slightly annoyed. His college-age perspective focused more on the disruption to the party than on the significance of whatever family discussion was taking place. "What's going on out here?" Tyler asked, his tone carrying the entitlement that had always characterized his approach to family situations. "People are asking where everyone is and the band is ready to start the dance." "Ashley, you're supposed to have your first dance with Marcus. And Mom, people are looking for you to help coordinate the evening timeline." His focus on social logistics revealed his lack of awareness about the gravity of what was being discussed. Robert appeared behind Tyler, his expression showing the kind of controlled concern that he used in business situations, when problems needed to be managed quickly and efficiently. His eyes moved from the military documents to General Morrison's uniform, and I could see him calculating the potential impact of whatever was being discussed on his family's reputation and social standing. "Jessica, Patricia," Robert said, his voice carrying the authority that he used to manage insurance claims and business negotiations. "Perhaps we should move this conversation to a more private setting." "General Morrison, I'm sure whatever military matter you need to discuss with Jessica can be handled through appropriate channels rather than during a family celebration." His attempt to dismiss the general and control the situation revealed the same kind of social manipulation that had characterized my family's dynamics throughout my childhood. General Morrison's response was immediate and unmistakably authoritative, his military bearing making it clear that he wouldn't be intimidated or dismissed by civilian social pressure. "Miss Martinez, this matter concerns Agent Martinez's legal entitlements under federal military benefits regulations. These aren't optional discussions that can be postponed for social convenience, and Agent Martinez has a right to understand her full situation immediately." The general's use of Robert's surname without the respectful tone that Robert was accustomed to receiving created visible tension, and I could see Robert beginning to understand that this wasn't a situation where his usual combination of authority and charm would be effective. Military officers operated under different rules and priorities than insurance executives, and General Morrison's commitment to protecting my rights wasn't subject to social pressure or business negotiation. "Furthermore," General Morrison continued, his voice taking on the kind of cold authority that came from decades of command responsibility, "there are questions about how Agent Martinez's military benefits were handled that may require official investigation. The systematic failure to notify a service member's dependent about available resources could constitute violations of federal regulations that extend beyond family disagreement." The mention of official investigations sent visible shock through both Robert and our mother, and I could see them beginning to understand that this wasn't just a family conflict that could be managed through emotional manipulation or social pressure. Military benefits were governed by federal law, and the deliberate obstruction of a service member's access to those benefits could have legal consequences that extended far beyond family relationships. Ashley stepped closer to me, her wedding dress rustling as she moved to create a physical alliance that reflected her growing understanding of the situation. "Jess," she said, her voice carrying the kind of protective authority that she used with patients who needed advocacy, "I want to see all of these documents. I want to understand exactly what was hidden from you and what resources should have been available to you throughout your life." Her support felt like a lifeline in a situation that was becoming increasingly overwhelming, and I realized that Ashley's medical training had given her both the analytical skills to process complex information and the moral framework to recognize when someone had been systematically deceived and harmed. Her willingness to prioritize truth over family harmony represented a courage that I hadn't expected but desperately needed. As I began sharing the documents with Ashley, I could see other wedding guests gathering near the French doors, their curiosity about the family drama beginning to overcome their social politeness about respecting privacy. The conversation that my mother had wanted to keep hidden was becoming increasingly public, and I realized that the elegant wedding reception was about to become the setting for revelations that would be remembered long after the romantic details were forgotten. Tyler moved closer to our group, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as he began to grasp that something significant was being discussed. "What documents?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of entitlement that came from always being included in family information. "What's this about Jess's father and military benefits? I thought Robert was Jess's father just like he's mine." The innocent question revealed that Tyler had grown up with the same false narrative that Ashley and I had believed, and I realized that the deception about my parentage had shaped his understanding of family relationships as well. The revelation that Robert wasn't my biological father would affect Tyler's sense of family identity and his understanding of his own place in our family structure. "Tyler," Ashley said, her voice carrying the gentle authority that she used when delivering difficult medical news to patients. "It appears that Jess's biological father was actually a military officer who died when she was very young, and Mom has been hiding this information along with substantial military benefits that should have been available to Jess throughout her life." Her explanation was clear and factual, designed to help Tyler understand the situation without overwhelming him with the emotional complexity of what was being revealed. Tyler's reaction was immediate and characteristically self-focused, his first concern being how this information affected his own understanding of family relationships rather than the injustice that had been done to me. "So Robert isn't really Jess's father?" he asked, his voice reflecting confusion rather than outrage. "Does that mean we're not really brother and sister?" The question revealed Tyler's limited understanding of how family relationships could exist independently of biological connections, and I felt a surge of sadness about how our family's emphasis on genetics and bloodlines had shaped his perspective on love and loyalty. The idea that our sibling relationship might be diminished by the revelation of different biological fathers suggested that he had never understood the bonds that had developed between us through shared experiences and genuine affection. "Tyler," I said, my voice carrying both reassurance and gentle correction, "Robert legally adopted me when I was 5 and you've been my brother for your entire life. Biology doesn't change the relationship we've built or the love I have for you, but it does explain some of the family dynamics that have always been difficult for me to understand." My explanation was designed to maintain our connection while helping him process the new information about our family structure. As the family confrontation continued to intensify, I became aware that Marcus had joined the group gathering near the French doors, his expression showing concern about the obvious tension that was affecting his new wife and threatening to overshadow their wedding celebration. His medical training had taught him to recognize crisis situations, and I could see him assessing whether intervention was needed to protect Ashley from whatever family drama was unfolding. The sight of Marcus reminded me that this confrontation was taking place during what should have been the happiest day of Ashley's life, and I felt a surge of guilt about allowing family secrets to explode during her wedding celebration. The timing was terrible, but the circumstances had been created by decades of deception rather than by my choice to seek truth, and I realized that continuing to protect our mother's lies would only perpetuate the harm that had been done to our family relationship. Robert stepped forward with the kind of authoritative presence that he used in business negotiations when he needed to control outcomes and manage potential damage. "General Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the respectful tone that he used with important clients while maintaining the underlying firmness that came from his executive experience. "I think there may be some misunderstanding about how these military matters were handled. Patricia and I have always acted in Jessica's best interests, and any decisions that were made about military benefits were intended to provide stability and security for our family." His explanation was carefully crafted to suggest good intentions, while avoiding direct admission of wrongdoing, and I could see him trying to reframe the systematic deception as protective parenting rather than selfish manipulation. The approach might have been effective in business disputes where competing interpretations of events could be negotiated, but the documentary evidence that General Morrison possessed made such explanations impossible to sustain. General Morrison's response was immediate and devastating in its precision, his military experience having taught him how to cut through diplomatic language and focus on essential facts. "Ms. Martinez, Agent Martinez, was legally entitled to receive notification about her military benefits, regardless of your family's preferences about stability and security. These weren't discretionary decisions that could be made by adoptive parents.
they were federal legal obligations that appear to have been systematically ignored or obstructed. The general's use of legal terminology made it clear that this wasn't a matter of family disagreement or parenting philosophy but a question of federal compliance and legal obligation. Military benefits were governed by specific regulations that couldn't be overridden by family preferences, and the failure to ensure that I received proper notification about available resources could constitute violations that had serious consequences. As the weight of potential legal implications began to sink in, I could see both Robert and our mother beginning to understand that they had created a situation that extended far beyond family dynamics and social embarrassment. The systematic denial of military benefits to a service member's dependent wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially criminal in ways that could affect their professional reputations and legal stand. The confrontation that had begun as a family argument about hidden parentage was evolving into something much more serious, with federal regulations and legal obligations creating stakes that none of us had anticipated when the evening began. The elegant wedding celebration that my mother had planned so carefully was becoming the setting for revelations that would reshape our family relationships and potentially create legal consequences that would last far beyond this single evening. Ashley moved closer to me, her physical presence creating an alliance that reflected her growing understanding of the injustice that had been done, and her determination to support me in seeking truth and accountability. The sister who had always been the family favorite was choosing to stand with me against the deception that had shaped our entire childhood, and her support felt like the beginning of authentic family relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.